Welcome back. We're very happy to have you back with us as we continue to study through the Bible through these videos. Today we're going to start a brand new series of the heroes of faith in the Bible. Now, the Bible is full of great heroes and heroines, of such that could fill any number of great Hollywood blockbusters. In fact, many movies have been made about them. But for this series, we're going to be having a look at other heroes in the Bible. We could so easily go to the great warrior Samson or David or others who did great and magnificent things. But we're going to be looking at those lesser-known heroes of the Bible. The heroes of the Bible, like the slave girl who saved the great general Naaman, or Ruth, and many other heroes of faith. We're going to start in the book of Genesis. Now, just after Adam and Eve had been cast out of the garden because of the sin they committed, we read of the birth of their first children. And we find that in Genesis chapter 4. Notice what we read there in verses 1 and 2. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have begotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was the keeper of flocks, but Cain was the tiller of the ground. Now these two brothers grew up, and in time we read about them offering to God a sacrifice. Notice what we read, starting in verse 3. Now it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, on his part, brought the firstlings of his flock and their fat, and their portion of it. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, the Lord, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Now this is a confusing passage. Here we have two brothers. They're both offering to God a sacrifice. Now, Cain, remember, he was a farmer. He worked the fields. And so he offered the fruit that he produced. Now, Abel, on his part, he was a keeper of flocks. And so he offered to God a lamb, a young lamb or a young goat that he produced. Now, we read here that God had regard for Abel's sacrifice and not of Cain's. And Cain became very angry. Now the passage goes on, and we read that his anger boiled over to such an extent that he went out and killed his brother Abel. Abel was killed by his own brother. The first two children of Adam and Eve, one killed the other. How sad it is that the very first mention of worship in the Bible led to the very first murder in the Bible. As I said, this is a confusing passage until we jump forward to the New Testament, and there the Hebrew writer explains to us why God had regard for Abel's sacrifice and not of Cain's. Turn over with me to the book of Hebrews, and we're going to be reading Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4. Now, Hebrews 11 is called by many the faith's hall of fame, for it is filled with faithful men and women. And it's a wonderful passage that we can read of. And notice what we read in verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testing about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. Now we've got to be careful when we read this, because this gives us the answer. It was by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Now, whenever we read the Bible, we've got to be careful not to apply our own thinking about what's happening. We've got to allow the Bible to interpret itself. You know, we have to decide what it means by faith. Well, we need to turn over to Romans 10 and verse 17 to read how we get faith. Romans 10:17 says, so faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Faith is not some miraculous gift that we get, but it is a result of hearing the word of God. This is why God has always sent out preachers to proclaim the word of God so that the hearers would gain faith. Okay, what does this mean about our dear hero of faith, Abel? We see he offered his sacrifice by faith. He had heard the word of God and he did what God said. Cain, on his part, he too would have heard the word of God, but he chose to offer a sacrifice that God had not asked. The Bible tells us clearly that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Abel offered a sacrifice, which was the shedding of blood of the firstlings of his flock, and that pleased God because that was what God had asked for. Abel offered a better sacrifice than Cain by faith, and faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Well, what does this mean to us today? Well, we can be heroes of faith if we take the word of God, if we hear it and we do what God has asked us to do. That is why he has given us the Bible, so that we can read, we can understand, and we can obey God. And thus, we too can be pleasing to God. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again. If you have any questions or like to make any comments at all, put them in the comment section below, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll get right back to you. So, goodbye for now.